Welcome to Naked Faith, where we take off the masks, drop the performances, and get honest about what it really means to follow Jesus. I'm Ron, and these are my amazing co-hosts, Grace and Michelle. Together, we're creating a space for real conversations, real stories, and real encounters with a love that never gives up. No agendas, no religious hypes, just real people sharing how God met them in the messy middle and pointing to one truth: Jesus still transforms lives. So whether you're walking strong or hanging on by a thread, you're welcome here. This is Naked Faith. Let's get into it. Well, welcome. As we told you guys last week, we are honored to have Mr. David Shapiro with us today. And so, David, I am going to let you introduce yourself and just tell our listeners who you are.
Absolutely. I love actually the messy middle part, because mine seems like a messy beginning and middle and kind of starting to get together at the end. So I love that.
Exactly.
I am David. I was born an Orthodox Jew. I've since found Christ and spent a lot of my time now evangelizing and doing apologetics, which I love, and just talking to anybody who'll listen about what Jesus has done in my life. So that's, I can take you through the entire story if you'd like, but it is a very odd story of an Orthodox Jewish man who is now a follower of Christ.
I would be interested.
Okay.
I mean,
Hey, go for it.
Convinced. You twist my arm.
yeah, there you go.
So I was born, like I said, an Orthodox Jew. I was also born with dyslexia, and trying to learn Hebrew is hard enough. Trying to learn Hebrew when the words dance upon the stage, the page is a little bit difficult. So I was failing out of school. Hebrew school I really didn't like. And then when I went to temple, I didn't feel the connection with God. I felt like everybody else was connecting with him, but he wasn't connecting with me, and he made me different. And because of that, I just started moving further and further away. I always tell the story. I wasn't the ideal student either. I don't want to blame everything on God. There were times where I didn't want to go to school, and I would put a note on the door that said that school was closed that day. Just in case my mother walked by, she would see that there was a note on the door so I wouldn't get in trouble. So it was just an interesting youth of trying to avoid school, but also trying to avoid myself, which is what I ultimately realized later in life. I was just trying to avoid all the things that made me uncomfortable. So right around 16, 17 years old, I fell away from Judaism completely. I walked away. I said, no, there is no God. He did nothing for me. He wasn't here for me. Everyone is just using God to feel better about themselves, but there really isn't anything there. And I started kind of following the mantra of, if there is, I'm a good person, so I'm sure he'll allow me into heaven. But I don't need to believe in anything specific, and I really don't think there's a God anyway. And I started to develop my physical body because my emotional side was a wreck and my intellectual side was non-existent. So I started just training my body and went to the military. I became a professional fighter for 13 years. I really just built myself up to where honestly, it was a lot of noise. If the noise was going, if I was hitting the heavy bag and I heard the noise and I heard the grunts, then I wouldn't hear what was going on in my own head, my own heart, which was a disaster. I covered myself up with over 40 tattoos, and it was to cover a pain in my life. It was the first one I got. Somebody was like, oh, look at that tattoo. And in my head, I said, oh, this is great. They're looking at that tattoo. They're not looking at me. And so I got another one and another one and another one. And it was just more covering up of noise. It was noise now of ink on my body. And that was how I lived for over 20 years. I just lived fine. I didn't feel horrible. I was blocking everything out. But everything still felt empty. And every once in a while I'd feel a tug and I'd ask, is this really it? Is this all my life is amounting to? And my mother was suffering with cancer at the same time, and she suffered for about 10 years. But for 10 years, they said, hey, at any moment she's going to go. And she lasted for 10 years. And the last week of her life, she accepted Jesus as her Lord and Savior, watching televangelists, watching TV pastors. She was watching them and just felt comfort and accepted Jesus. And even when she passed, I chalked it to, she was losing her mind. She needed to find comfort somewhere. She was going to die. So that's where she found comfort. I still didn't understand where God was. And if anything, that made me think God doesn't exist, because this was a wonderful woman, and why would you take her from me? And it was still many, many years after that. And I woke up one day and I looked at my wife, and I did not have a dream. I did not have any other thing other than a tug in my heart to go, I think I need to go to church, not temple. I was like, I think I need to go to church. And she said, what? I was like, I just feel like I need to go to church. And I looked up the closest church to my house, and I went. And now I'm an ex-Orthodox Jew covered in tattoos, cursing God for 30 years. And I step into this building, and I mean, awkward's not even the word for it. And I snuck in, and I snuck in the back, and the lights went out, and the pastor started to speak, and everything he said was meant for me. It just pierced right into me. I don't remember breathing. Everything I remember was for me. And another pastor came out afterwards and said, hey, I saw you in there. I know you're new. I told him a little bit about my story. He said, here's a Bible. Read Matthew. This is a Jewish perspective of the New Testament. Just read it. Come back next week. Tell me what you think. I took the book. I figured, I didn't tell him I was dyslexic. I was like, I haven't read since I was a kid. I'm not doing this. I started to read, and next week I came back, and he said, okay, how far did you get? I said, I read the whole thing. He said, you read all of Matthew? I said, no, I read the entire Bible. I took off from work. I read the Bible cover to cover. And the crazy part is I was able to understand all of it. This was, for that week, my dyslexia was gone. And it wasn't a long-held miracle because today I still have dyslexia. I use a dyslexic Bible. But for that week, I was able to understand, and I just fell in love with God. And my journey from there was just learning as much as I could about him and restore 30 years of walking away.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. There's so
Incredible.
much that I'm like intrigued by that. I don't know.
I know.
Like, well, the last thing you said, I don't think I ever knew a dyslexic Bible was a thing.
Yes. So the ESV has a version of a dyslexic Bible, which it separates the words in the paragraphs a little bit bigger. The words are a little bit bigger, but it also has different colors that you can cover up the Bible to read better through. And the same thing, I'm a big guy. I'm 6'3", I'm 280. I was a pro fighter for 13 years. So of course, the color God picked for my eyes was pink. And that's the color that I read through. It's nice and ironic. I appreciate going to teach a class and pulling out a pink cover and putting it on my Bible, but that's what I read best through.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Okay, I just got that. So can you get it in, like, when you say the pink, like that's the colors you recognize?
So that's the one that I read best through. So there's blue, green, purple, orange, red. It comes with like 12 or 15 different colors, this Bible. And you read through each one to see which one your brain, I guess, corrects best through. And for me, the color it corrects best through is pink.
Wow. Now, did you know that before you bought this dyslexic Bible, or was it through trial and error?
Yeah, when I was growing up, it was, it was your kid's slow, your kid's stupid, he's not applying himself. Dyslexia wasn't a thing. I never knew anything about dyslexia. I learned more about it once I figured out what it was after I read the Bible and wanted to figure out why I was different. I started to do a dive into it. So I never knew anything beforehand. And when I got the Bible, same thing. I didn't realize what color would be mine. I just trial and error. I said, okay, let me read this one out loud. Let me read that one out loud. And pink jumbles the words less. It's not a complete fix. Anybody who has dyslexia, if you run out and get it, don't go, how come I'm not healed? I still have trouble reading out loud, but it is a lot better.
Wow.
Nice. That just sounds pretty magical that you have pink as your reading color,
Yes.
Hey, real men wear pink.
That's it.
Yes.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, all the proof you need that God is a woman.
I have a
also.
pink dress.
No, but yeah. Nice.
So you grew up Orthodox. Now, did you attend synagogue or temple?
I did. I went to shul
as a kid.
I went to shul. I did everything you're supposed to do as an Orthodox child. We had Shabbos. We had all the high holidays. We, kept kosher. We said the Shema every day. I mean, this was Orthodox Jewish household. So I grew up. The temple that I went to also had a Hebrew school that was Orthodox that I attended. When I was bar mitzvahed, I was actually, I'm a version of Jewish called Ashkenazi. That just tells you kind of what part of the area, what part of the world you're from. But again, because I kept doing poorly in school, they kept holding me back. So I ended up getting a private tutor, and I got bar mitzvahed in a Sephardic temple, which is still Orthodox, but that was my whole life as a child, was going to temple and reading the Torah and trying to understand who I was and where my tradition was.
Wow.
So, what about Christ felt different for you to connect with?
Oh, well, so growing up, a lot of people say, hey, did you not believe in Christ? Did you not, like Christ? What was, we didn't know about Jesus. It's not something that you're ever taught. So it's not as if you're even taught, hey, this is somebody who you should not believe as God. You're just never mentioned. His name is never mentioned. So I didn't know who Jesus was. As I got older and people started telling me stories, I thought his full name was Jesus Christ, first name Jesus, last name Christ. I thought that, people hated the Jewish people because what I heard was we killed their God. So I was not a fan of Jesus growing up, knowing about who he was. I had a very false thought until I got a chance to actually meet him.
Wow.
Yeah,
Did you experience people?
So a lot of people, when they think about Jewish upbringing, so there's a cycle that is read in temple, and it's called the Haftorah. And during holidays, they read specific things. They usually read the 5 books of Moses, and then they read very specific passages in the Bible, the Old Testament. When they read it, you actually have a cycle that when they go through the prophets, they skip certain parts. So Isaiah 53, everyone says, well, how come? Well, because they don't read it. They don't read parts of Daniel. They don't read, and it's not on purpose. It's not like they're leaving it out because they don't want people to know about Jesus. It's just not part of their cyclic readings, which goes back to around 70 AD of the falling of the Second Temple. So they have not read these things for almost 2,000 years. So for me, it wasn't as if, as a Jewish person, I was taught to reject. You just didn't even know this existed. So the first time I read the entire Bible was the first time I read Isaiah 53, first time I read all of the prophetic words leading to Christ, and was genuinely shocked. And since then, I've learned one of the biggest things I study is why do Jewish people who are knowledgeable still reject him? So I go through that as well, and it's really, really interesting.
That was my next question. Why is it that Jewish people, like, if there's so many prophecies in the Bible that point to this person, how do you deny that?
So there's a couple of different things. One is they never heard of him the way my life was, but I was a child. Then you have people that grow up in Orthodoxy. If you are a Reformed Jew, typically it's just you're following the tradition. You don't really know why. You might have seen a full Bible. You're just believing in the God of the Jewish Bible because when you were Orthodox and you're learning and you're studying, typically what happens is you either don't hear about it the way it happened for me, or if you hear about it, they say, well, Isaiah 53 is about the nation of Israel, not about an individual. The nation of Israel will be beaten and they will go. And then if you go a step further, you go, well, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. Then they talk about God and they say, God is not going to be 3 in 1. God, that is, you're now idolatry. You're actually worshiping 3 different gods because they don't understand the Trinity, which, to be honest, is very hard to describe to begin with. So they don't believe in the Trinity, and they go, if you believe in God being 3, it can't be. Then they go, okay, God will never be human. He's a God, therefore he can't come down as human. And they go on and on and on, and they keep having a debate over anything else you bring to their attention. And it goes into even sacrifices in Levitical law. They can then disprove that way. And so they just keep coming up with responses of why it's impossible that Jesus was God. Therefore, he could have been a good teacher. Josephus mentions him. He's a good teacher, but he's definitely not God. And they even reject him as the Messiah, which the Jewish Messiah does not say God. A Jewish Messiah, the Savior, doesn't say he's God, but they even reject him as the Messiah. So
very interesting.
Yeah.
Like, I've never understood that. And I guess, I've grown up lots of friends that were Jewish and never, I mean, we never talked about it when you're teenagers. That's the last thing on your mind, right? But you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I just don't understand. Like, I mean, there are a lot of things. I think they did this analysis at one point, and there's, you know, several 100,000. That my number is probably exaggerated, but there's a lot of things in the Bible that point to it had to be Jesus.
Mm-hmm. So Jesus has over 300 prophetic words that point to Jesus, that points to the Messiah. I won't say points to Jesus, points to the Messiah. Jesus fulfilled them all. The mathematical possibility of that, of him fulfilling 1 in 27 of them, not even all 300, just 27, becomes almost astronomically impossible mathematically. You go to 45, the mathematicians actually say that it's impossible. And now he fulfilled, you know, over 300. So yes, the number is, you know, I forgot, one of the mathematicians said, if you take every atom inside of our bodies, inside every body in the entire world, and you have to pick out one single atom, that's the you know, the statistics on Jesus fulfilling all of them. I mean, it's just such an astronomical number, we can't even comprehend it.
Yeah.
So but there is definitely some, you know, if it was that easy, everybody would believe. And I think the problem is that with every belief, with every proof, there is somebody on their side saying, well, no, that's not it. That's not what this, you know, look at this over here. This makes it not make sense. Hey, the Messiah was supposed to come in and usher peace for the entire world. And Jesus didn't do that. He was supposed to bring back every Jew to Jerusalem, into Israel, and he didn't do that. Therefore, it's not him. Not because they reject the second coming. They say, no, this is supposed to be the first time around. Second coming doesn't make any sense, so we're rejecting it. I mean, I'm telling you, every single objection they have is directly towards something that is in the New Testament talking about Jesus.
That makes sense. Just, yeah. Yeah. But what was like the biggest thing that you learned once you, or maybe not learned, or discovered when you kind of switched to Christianity and learned more about Jesus?
I think so. Obviously, growing up Jewish, some of the words I realized just how much meaning they end up having. But more than that, I think the most interesting thing was, and this happened. This is why I became a pastor. This is why I went back to school. I was at church. I was at a church, the same one I started at. And I was volunteering now, and I was a greeter. And one of the times I was greeting, and a couple of the pastors were having a conversation about young earth versus old earth. And I just started listening in, and then I started adding my discussion, my opinion on it. And I loved every second of that. I said, this is incredible. They get to just sit around and talk about Jesus all day. Like, I want to do that. And literally that day I was like, I went home and said, I need to enroll in school. I need to learn more about this. And I want to do that for the rest of my life. And it was that conversation, young earth versus old earth. I fell in love with apologetics. I ran to school. I started learning about it. I actually got my master's in biblical archaeology. I mean, I wanted to learn about what these things were. What proof do we have to believe in what we believe? And my thought was and it's funny, we just talked about this before we started this podcast, as martial arts. So I was a martial artist for almost 30 years. The one thing I used to hear is, oh, when I was a kid, I used to take martial arts. I heard it from everybody. And I remember being an adult still in martial arts going, what do you mean when you were a kid? Why'd you stop? And when I became a Christian, I heard people going, when I was young, I used to go to church. I was like, oh man, why'd you stop? And all of a sudden I realized that at some point my emotions were going to get the best of me. Something in my life was going to happen. I just felt Christ in my life, and I didn't want to have my heart reject him. So what I said was, aha, I got it. If I develop my brain, my logical side to believe in him, when my heart goes low, my head will kick in. And then when my heart's back, it'll kick back in, and I'll never lose him again. And it was that's exactly what I was like, that's where I'm going to do. And I studied the logical side of Jesus. And that way, if anything ever happened in my life that would deflate my heart to question him, I would know logically, no, this is all true.
Have you had those moments though where you maybe doubted it or yeah?
I've had the moments where you kind of look up and you go, either really or are you there? Are you doing something else right now? Because I know you could be everywhere at once, and it just seems like you're a little bit distant. So I've had those moments, not so much of doubt where I was losing him that I feared, just moments I think that everybody has every once in a while, which is, all right, enough messing around here, or enough of the testing. I'm ready for the next part.
Right.
Are you though?
I know.
Are you?
Yes.
You think you are, but there's still something there that's
I know.
like knocking on the door. So I was literally woken up by someone knocking, or the sound of someone knocking on the door this morning. So I was like, "What is happening?" But anyways,
There you go.
It's a sign.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I teach on
It's
it.
a sign.
I mean, people know that God is going to feel absent at times, and the greatest thing about the Bible is that we know how the story ends. That's the great part. We read the story, we read about David, we know how it ends. We're like, great. When it comes to our own lives, I'm like, all right, I'm here. I'm just waiting. Like, where's the next step? You realize that some of these characters have waited dozens and dozens of years. You look at the story of Joseph when he was sold by his brothers. I mean, he was in prison and waiting around for over a decade. And I'm going, okay, I guess if I'm whining about the last couple of months, I'm doing okay.
Right, and it can be hard to like look at your own
kinda
life
funny when you frame it that
from
way.
an objective
Yeah.
perspective.
Well, the other thing, which is a scary perspective, and I teach this actually when I teach Joseph, is I go, okay, Joseph went through all of this. I mean, really went through some serious pain to the point where when he finally was able to reconcile with his family, he cried for 13 different verses. He's the biggest crybaby in the Bible, cries and cries and cries because he held on to his emotions for so long. And you're going, man, here's such a character hurt for so long, going through the pain for so long. And then I tell everybody, what happens to him afterwards? And nobody knows. I go, his brother Judah is the one who made the plan to sell him. He was the one that had the transformation. He was then the one that protected his brother. He was the ancestor of David and then Christ. So the story about Joseph, I look at people, I go, he went through all that pain, and sometimes that pain's not even about you. You go through that pain so that way your brother can learn the lesson, who ended up being the ancestor of Jesus. That's even harder to swallow, to go, man, I'm going through something for months and months and months that might not even be for me. It's a lesson for somebody else. That's brutal to think about.
That's
true.
That hit home in a way. Yeah. Sorry, I just
It
I did not know that.
We've all gone through moments where we think, what is this for? This has to be for something. There has to be a reason I'm going through this. And to hear that sometimes it's not about us, it's about somebody else is brutal. But the truth is, if you really look at the story, it is for both. Joseph got to learn something. He got to use his skills that God gave him. He moved to a place of power, being viceroy. He was able to save the people from famine. But he went through torture for years for that. And the story ends up ending there for him and continues for his brother. So there is a reason for all of it. But yes, sometimes it's hard to think that the reason's for somebody else. But then when you take a moment and go, wow, well, if my suffering can then produce Jesus, would I do it? And everyone's like, oh, okay, I guess. I love my kids, and there are times where I sacrifice for them, and it's hard. And afterwards I go, but it was worth it. So I think once you know, again, the end of the story, it makes it worth it.
True that. True that. Why apologetics? It's a fascinating subject.
It is. Again, it was to protect my own brain, and then it was. It turned into. I turned into a Pharisee, 100%, because it was all about, wow, somebody who could not learn is learning all of this stuff. And I was debating people, and I was winning debates, and I was feeling really, really prideful about my brain that never worked before, that all of a sudden is kicked into high gear. So I continued on that path for the position of pride until I got called out on that brutally, and went through a moment where I go, oh, wow, okay, I need to figure this out. And that was a gentleman who I debated with, and he asked why, God allows suffering to good people. And I was ready for it. This is something I studied, and I just bombarded him with stuff, and I hit him left and I hit him right, and I knew I got it. And I'm an ex-fighter, so I'm like, man, I'm going to treat this as a fight, and I'm going to destroy him. And I did. Debating wise, I did what I knew I could do. And he walked away, and one of our friends was like, do you know why he asked you that? I said, why? He said, because he lost his wife. And I just had a moment where all of my pride emptied out, and I just realized that what I'm taught is to minister to people, not to beat them. And there I was focusing on beating people and not ministering to them. And what he needed at that moment was not a healthy debate. It was a hug. And I missed that. And I missed just the ministry of presence. Just keep my mouth shut and be present. And that was the lesson where I still love apologetics, but I started to blend it with pastoral care and ministry. Even in that, it's interesting because if you read about dyslexia, the way we learn is through stories. So pastoral care, blending it with apologetics, it's almost as if God at that point was like, hey, look, for you to be sustaining here, you have to also do it the way that I made you, which is you're not going to beat somebody at some point with information. You need to base it around stories because that's how your dyslexia works. So I've actually become a better apologist from that moment, knowing how to then mix it in with stories rather than just here's a fact, here's a fact, here's a fact, because that doesn't work for everybody. So, and as far as am I still doing it? Yes. I actually just I have a book coming out in about 3 weeks called Unshakable. This is the evidence behind the Bible, and is an apologetics book from a Jewish perspective. And it's just a beautiful book of a lot of really deep and wonderful ways we can defend our faith and why we believe what we believe.
Yeah. But I meant, like, are you still practicing as a pastor, like, currently?
I am, and I'm also the chaplain for a local fire department, which is great. I get to, I get to practice my ministry of silence and just being there for other people who've been through some really tough moments. So yes, I get to do both, and I absolutely love it. One of my favorite things to do right now is I pastor a young adults group. They are 18 to 25, and it is amazing. They're brilliant. They're loving. They're wonderful. And they're on the cusp of they are in their wilderness period. They are in the period between Egypt and the promised land of figuring out what they're going to do with their life. And it's a great time.
Mm-hmm. They might not think that, but I get it.
Yes, probably not. But I try to remind them that it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. And I try to teach them how to have their own faith with God, not my faith. I don't want them to have my faith. I don't want to just teach them what I believe. Listen, we call about young earth, old earth, and we get into debates for hours about it because I want them to have their own legs. Because whatever you believe, if you believe for the glory of God, you're great. I'm not there to convince you one way is better than another.
Okay, why can't there be more pastors like you?
We're out there. We might just not be the popular ones.
I was going to say, they seem to be far and few between, though.
Right.
That's the problem.
People love tension and controversy. I mean, you see it. You pass by an accident and you're going to slow down and check it out. Nobody, slows down for good drivers. It's what it is. So I think that people, because they love the tension, they do gravitate towards pastors who take a stance and have a loud voice. And that's not me. My stance is Jesus. That's it. That's my stance. I stand on his word. And to some people, that's boring. They go, well, that's not very fun. He's all about love, and we want to be about hate, and that's not what I do.
Mm-hmm. But
Yeah. Go ahead, Grace.
I was just gonna say, I love what you said about they each have to find their own personal relationship with their faith. I never really thought of it like that, but yeah.
I will open your eyes to scripture. I will tell you about how beautiful God is throughout it. I will tell you the good and the bad. I'll tell you the stories, and we'll go deep into translation. But ultimately, I will also tell you different sides, because there are people that will look at the Israelites and go, wow, we're on their side. We're reading the Old Testament and they escaped Egypt, and how great is this? But they miss the moments where God hardens Pharaoh's heart, which he does. They miss moments where, the Pharaoh's people are consumed by the water and drowned, which they are. So you either hear it on one side of somebody who is cursing God, saying, I don't believe in him because look at how mean he is. Or you have somebody on another side saying, look how great God is, and let me point to all the great things he does. Meanwhile, he can be both. God doesn't need a defense. He doesn't need me to defend him. He needs me to be obedient. But I want people to hear both sides and say, where do you land? Do you land in a part where I'm going, hey, God, I don't understand that. I don't quite get that. Great. He's like, that's wonderful. Read about it, study it, question me about it, yell at me for it, do something. But that's believing in him, is having that confusion. Or, God, I understand it. I'm with you 100%. Great. Then keep going. But I think that people are so afraid to uncover things that they're going, well, I have to protect God or my own feelings. And that's not it. It's no, he wants us to go deep. He wants us to understand and to learn. And there are things we're never going to understand. I find myself a fairly compelling person with a lot of stories. If you ask me to explain the Trinity, I have no clue. That is a part of Christianity I cannot do justice to. And I'll tell somebody I can't do it. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means that I don't have the capacity to understand it the way God does.
Huh. So, okay. So when you put it that way, right? Like, here's the questions that I have.
Mm-hmm.
And, we were just talking about this. So first question I have is, we were just talking about this in our last episode about the younger generation.
Mm-hmm.
So you see this trend where, you go to most churches now and it's the 40 and above crowd.
Yep.
And the 30 and younger are not coming to church.
Yep.
So why do you think that is?
So believe it or not, there is a study that is showing that currently there are younger generations coming back to church at a larger number than the older than 40 crowd, which is crazy. And it's just a new study. So what you said still holds weight because it's a new study and who knows where that comes from. But there is a study that they are returning, and I'm hoping that that's true. I think there's a lot of reasons why they don't. I think obviously different influencers, different things you read about, listen, we just went through, if you go through any holiday season, if you go through Christmas and Easter, you're going to hear one person go, hey, have a Christmas tree, another person going, oh, you're following paganism. And then you have Easter and you go, oh, that's wonderful, I celebrate Easter. You go, that's a pagan holiday. And I think that the confusion makes people hold back from joining in. It's not I'm going to hold back forever. It's I'm not sure, and I'm going to see how this plays out, and I don't have a definitive answer one way or another. The other thing is there are churches that have a reputation, and it's out there, and you start to hear these things, and there are also pastors who go through things that they should not have done. And what you hear is, well, if you believe in God and God's so great, why would this great pastor with millions of people following them do this horrendous action? And they wouldn't be false, except that I follow Christ, not Christians. So people make mistakes. And it's hard, though, when you are just getting your bearings on the world to go, while I'm getting my bearings on the world, I'm not really sure where I lean one way or another politically or financially or with my relationship, that I'm going to also enter in God to the picture. I think a lot of them hold off until they are a little bit more sure. But the ones that do come in, I think what they're experiencing is one, community, which is incredibly important, especially now in the days of computers and AI and video games. To be face to face with somebody, you can't even understand the benefits that has for somebody being in a community. And then the ones that really start to learn and study, they realize that, you know what, science and God aren't on opposite ends. They're actually really closely related. You start to realize that the belief that I have is actually based on something intelligent and not ignorant. And I think that the more comes out about science and archaeology and history, the more they realize I can believe in this stuff.
Yeah, I think it's a disservice that I don't know when the fracture happened, but there is a fracture between science and religion, and it's a disservice because I think I agree with what you're saying. Is there's a case for both, and I think, like, for me, at least for me, but I'm in the older crowd, but for me, when the science discoveries come out, it just reaffirms that there was an intelligent designer behind all of this. This did not just happen by chance. You know what I mean? There was a creator. Now, what that creator could be. I mean, we can debate that all day, right? But there was an intelligent designer that created where we are, and we're not just here by accident or mere, a single cell amoeba multiplied a million times and created human life, right? It just, like, there's too many unknowns. There's too many,
Mhm.
you know what I'm saying, right? There's too many things out there that, like, that it's statistically impossible for that to happen, right? Like,
There is. It is the same thing. You get back to that math of statistics, and it's just there's no way that it could have happened. There's no viable reason. And then you can look at things like, hey, in science, and I love science, and I love scientists. But when we were growing up, dinosaurs were big lizards. Now they're big birds. I mean, that alone, there are shifts that happen where you have more information brought to science. It does not mean that science is bad. It just means it was inconclusive, and they got more information and they ended up changing it. It was, hey, there was a no beginning to this world. It's been going on forever. It's infinite. And then all of a sudden research is done and goes, oh, wait, there was a starting point. We're going to call it the Big Bang. It's just very interesting that as you go through science figures out new stuff all the time. And that's okay. That doesn't mean that they're wrong. It means that they have new information that's getting inserted. What's really cool is when you start to see the Bible pointing out science that has existed there for thousands of years, and then modern science picks up on it and goes, oh, look what happens. Running water in Levitical law, you're supposed to clean and wash into running water. It's been there forever. It's been there since Levitical law. And in the 1900s, there's a scientist by the name of Semmelweis who was a doctor. He would come in the morning. He would look at all the cadavers from the night before, anybody who passed away in the hospital. He would look at them, examine them, and then he would actually go to the maternity ward. And he would then either deliver babies or check on the mothers. And infant death was an alarming rate, very high. We know now the bacteria that you carry. We know how this works. So what they used to do, doctors back then, is they'd wash their hands in a basin, still water. He figured out that if you do it in running water, it actually saves more babies. He was figuring out, and then they started to discover bacteria and things like that. So he was following a Levitical law from 3,000 years ago of washing and running water that we knew about then. That's the science I look at. I go, nobody knew it back then. God knew it. He told us. And as soon as we followed it, we saved all these lives. How incredible. That's the part where science really matches up very well with God and biblical law.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I never really studied Levitical law because it just gets boring. For most people, you try to read all the laws and you're like, oh.
Levitical law is one of my favorite books. I love Leviticus. I love Leviticus because you start to realize just how smart God is. You start to realize how much science is in there. You start to realize that there's even things where who people believe in energy, and they go, okay, there's energy that has positive and negative effects on anatomy, and this is proven. This happens. So when Levitical law says you should not wear linen and wool at the same time, you go, somebody has actually done research on the effect to the anatomy and the energy produced by it. And wool and linen alone is almost maximum energy that it produces. But when you put them on together, it goes to the negative. It goes to the negative energy field. Even that, you're going, was that done on purpose? I don't know. It's weird. It's a weird law to be in there. If God knew that, hey, wearing these together is actually going to affect your anatomy, maybe there's so many laws that just, like I said, I love Leviticus. I understand what you say. Most people read that, or they read genealogies and they're like, can I just skip this part because this is brutal. It's really hard to read. But you start to realize what's in genealogy, what's in Levitical law. Genealogy of Adam to Noah. If you don't know, every Hebrew name has a correlation to it. So Adam meaning man, and you go through from Adam to Noah, all of the descendants, all the born. And it actually says that man was appointed mortal sorrow. And what was it? And the blessed God shall come down, teaching and bringing something for the despairing. I forget what it is, bringing peace for the despairing or something. So literally the first bunch of names in the Bible is telling that man has mortal sin, that God is going to send his son to teach us and to take away the sin for the despairing. That's the gist of what each name means. Even in genealogy, it's just brilliant. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. It is just beautifully written. And if anybody who doesn't believe it's inspired by the hand of God, you start to read things like that. You start to read, the science that's behind it. You start to look at how the Israelites camped around the tabernacle and what that makes from a sky view. If you haven't done that, I won't ruin it, but take a look at that.
Okay.
But even that stuff, there's nothing that's not intentional in the Bible. And that's when I read it again and I said, I need to study this because God's hand is all over this.
Okay, so how do you counter the argument? Because this is one of the things that I am at.
Okay.
We know the text has been altered. It's not an exact copy. So how do you counter that?
Well, which when you say the text we have has been altered in what way? That's the first thing.
They found older manuscripts and they don't. Well, okay. So here's the issues. Some of the concerns I have, and again, I'm not an atheist. I do believe that there is a God, right? So, but these are arguments that I get all the time. Is the different translations? We have multiple translations, and if you read, today there's probably 50 different translations, and they all use different words to say whatever that Hebrew word is.
Yep.
And you can get something, and then this is what I always hear, right? Well, you should just read them all. Okay, well, I don't have time to read 50 translations. You know what I'm saying? So I got to pick one that I like, but knowing that it's not an exact. And I think this is where sometimes people get misinterpretations of what's going on.
Absolutely. So
now, yeah, go ahead.
So that one, what I'll say is a translation is different than changing the wording. And I'll say just to address that, the different translations you have ones that do a word to word translation, a paragraph to paragraph, they paraphrase. So yes, there are some translations that are not as accurate as others. The ESV, which I use again, because it's dyslexic, is a pretty good translation. It holds pretty true to the original text that that was written down. That being said, yes, there are translations of the word like shalom, peace, which is one that everyone kind of knows. The word for peace has multiple different meanings behind it because Jewish people had different words for different things. So it's not just peace like calm, it's peace like more peace than you can possibly imagine. So it's not just, hey, I'm feeling at peace with something that happened in the household. Love is a huge one because I love pizza. I don't love pizza the same way I love my wife. So it's very different. So, and you have different translations of the word. So for translation wise, yes, it's frustrating. There are a lot of them. I would say you can get most of the word for word translations. The ESV version is a good one. You can read just that one and you're going to get a very, very good representation of what the Bible was. So that for that. Now for somebody who says, hey, but along the line, somebody changed words in it. What I would say is when you look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, found in 1947, we start to see how accurate the actual writing was. And now you're talking about this was written BC. They have it, mapped out as BC to AD, but this is an Essene tribe that lived out in the desert. A lot of their documents that have the Old Testament in it are the exact words that we're reading today. So for 2,000 plus years before they found it, the words are exactly the same. And when somebody says, well, there's differences. No, the difference is one says love, one says loves. One says, thou shalt not murder. And the other one says, you should not murder. It is the differences are so minute that it doesn't change the gospel, the story of the Bible or anything like that. So there's actually really, really accurate translations of it. But you do have people along the way who have changed things, and those ones have typically been rejected. Those are known as the pseudepigraphal books, the Didache, different books that you might have heard of, Enoch and Maccabees and things like that. There are certain groups that have accepted them as gospel. Most have not, and they realize that they're not true canon.
So I think where I have some concerns is who gets to decide what's canon.
Yep.
So, and here's, we have been diving into the Gnostic Nag Hammadi text, right? And so I think and some of it makes sense, as I read it, some of them like, oh, this really actually kind of makes sense. It offers a different view, a different viewpoint. And, again, I said I'm not 100% sure that I totally believe everything it says, but I do see some validity in it. But they've been completely rejected.
Yep.
And so, like here's some of the things I struggle with, right? Like we were just talking about this in our last episode. Judas is vilified because he turned Jesus in.
Okay.
But when you read, now let me give you a little backstory of what. So we were talking about Wicked.
Okay.
Right? I don't know if you've seen Wicked.
Love the musical. Love it. I saw it originally on Broadway when it first came out, so I love it.
Okay, awesome. So you see Wicked, right? Now I grew up as a kid of the 70s and the 80s, and oh my gosh, I forgot the name of the movie again.
Wizard of Oz.
Grace? Wizard of Oz. Thank you. I grew up watching this movie thinking that the Wicked Witch was evil.
Mm-hmm.
And then, 30 some years later, they write a backstory for the witch. And you find out in their version of the backstory, she's just trying to do the right thing. In her mind, she was doing the right thing, and the evil person was actually the wizard. And so, I kind of equate this to Judas, right? How do we know Judas wasn't playing his part? How do we know? Because it's not written anywhere in the Bible, but how do we know Jesus did not tell Judas that he had to turn him in? Because here's my argument.
Mm-hmm.
In order for Jesus to be resurrected, he had to die. So somebody had to do it.
Correct.
Why not Judas? And why do we vilify him for what he did? Because without that, we wouldn't have a resurrected Christ. I mean, we would, but you know what I'm saying? It would have been somebody.
A couple of things on that. One is Judas, obviously, he is following, again, prophecy from the Old Testament. So him actually selling out Jesus for the 30 pieces of gold, the silver, that's actually in the Old Testament. So him knowing exactly how much they would have offered him would have been impossible also. If he was just kind of faking it and going along with Jesus, having prophecy end up exactly the way it was supposed to anyway would be shocking. Second is he felt really guilty afterwards, threw the money back, which is also prophecy that he would be giving it back, and then killing himself. So you now have somebody who doesn't act as if somebody knew exactly what was going to happen all along. So I think that's compelling. But I do think that, yes, you're right, that God was waiting for a very specific time for a very specific set of people. He might have known that this is the right person that would have done this, but I don't think he would have coerced him into doing it. But when you talk about, you talk about the Wizard of Oz, and I'll kind of compare it with that. You have the Wicked Witch of the East, Wicked Witch of the West, right? Why do they call them Wicked Witch of the East and Wicked Witch of the West rather than just Wicked Witch? Because you'd be confused. Which one are you referring to? The one of the East or one of the West? Which one? Because they're both nasty. So which one are you referring to? That actually happens in the Bible. You have people like Judas Iscariot. You have people like Peter the Rock. You have different people who have names associated with them because at a time where there were a lot of Peters, well, which Peter are you referring to? And I go, well, I'm referring to Peter the Rock. Great. That's actually written a lot in canon. A lot of the books that are written that are not considered canon, if they say Peter, they just say Peter. They just say the names as though they're regular names. That actually is an indicator of when you're writing it, because when they were writing it, that was not a popular name. They would just write Wicked Witch. There's only one of them. Why do I have to write Wicked Witch of the East? Because there's only one. So even that, when you start looking at language, it's very specific as to why things were considered canon. And that's not the only reason, but there are things like that exist where you go, all right, that I never thought of that before. I can see why that is compelling, why one thing would be included and another wouldn't.
Yeah. So I think the thing that really interests me, and you just mentioned this, the book of Enoch, and it talks about the Nephilim and the giants, because the Nephilim is mentioned in one verse in the Bible, but then like in my research, you find out the Nephilim caused a cosmic shift that, really what was the original sin? Was it really Adam and Eve disobeying, or was it the angelic hosts coming down and mating with humans? Right. Like, I think there's a equal cosmic, I can't even think of the word I'm thinking of, but that event alone could have caused a significant cosmic rift.
Yeah. I think that,
but it's not talked about.
No. Well, Adam, first of all, is definitely the original sin, Adam and Eve. Even if you believe in the Nephilim and the flood and the reason them mating with humans, definitely the original sin was from Adam and Eve. Now you can question if it was because they ate of the tree or because they didn't repent of it. Because afterwards, when God asks them what you did, they could have very easily been like, you know what? I ate the tree. I'm really sorry. You told me not to eat it. But what ended up happening was Eve blamed the snake. Adam did worse and blamed Eve, and then blamed God, said, your creation did this. So that could have been original sin, but it definitely started with Adam and Eve. With the Nephilim, there are some really great text about Nephilim. And here's the thing. Could they have existed? Yes. Could there have been angels that came down and mated with humans and made these giants? Yes. I'm not going to say 100% no. Do I think that the book of Enoch, written tons of time after Enoch was even around, written by somebody not by the name of Enoch, not saying that this is canon, which a lot of the scriptures in New Testament also start off with, hey, this is who I am and this is what I'm writing about. Enoch wasn't. But even if all that existed, it still doesn't explain away why Enoch should be in the Bible. Because is it a historic document? Absolutely. Fun to read? Great. One that I think is even more historically accurate than that is Maccabees. You read Maccabees, you start to really learn some really great history that really happened. But I don't use it as canon because it's different. What's biblical, what's written by the hand of God, inspired by God, however you want to put it, I do feel there are a lot of differences. It could be the names that I talked about. It could be the who wrote it. There is a kind of like a, hey, if I want to learn about Julius Caesar, kind of want to learn about somebody who was around him at the time and not somebody who wrote it 400, 500, 600 years later. I don't think I'm going to get as accurate a depiction. So when you start to look at some of these books, they're written by people who were there at that time, written at that time. New Testament are the ones who were walking with Christ or the ones that walked with those that walked with Christ. There's something very compelling about hearing a story first or second hand rather than 500 years later. And that's another thing that unfortunately exists with some of the apocryphal writings.
Yeah, no, I get that. And I just, so like right now I'm not sure. I think you don't necessarily believe in the Nephilim. Is that what I'm getting?
No, I believe, listen, what's funny is I do believe that there were giants. It's very clear. Okay. I think there were. When you look at David and Goliath, I have a very awkward stance being from a pastor and reading the scriptures and all that. My take is that Goliath actually was not a healthy person. I think he suffered from a disease that made him large, that enlarged his heart. When you read the Bible, it actually says that he was helped onto the field. Well, that's weird. Why would Goliath, this massive fighter, need help onto the field? When you start to read about how he was holding his sword and what he was looking at and what he was doing, it actually speaks as somebody who was going through a medical issue that maybe he was giant because of a disease. And now people go, well, that's horrible because that means that David beat somebody who was dying anyway. And is that mighty? And I go, actually, I think the story's even better because typically when you look at everyone who goes, well, you have to go through your own Goliaths in life. I'm like, that's a great story. You know why? Most of our Goliaths are actually pretty beat up and messed up in our head. We make it this huge giant, this scary giant. Usually they're actually not so scary. They're usually a little bit beat up and medically challenged. And I'm going, wow, I was so scared of this. And then I did it and it wasn't so scary. I'm going, actually, I think that story works better for our lives than David and scary Goliath.
That's true. Good point.
But I do believe that there are things that I don't 100% understand. Like I said, it is valid. There could be Nephilim. Yes, the word exists before it. Yes, there is something that happened that caused God anger enough to flood the entire world. I do believe in the flood story. So could it have been this? Maybe. Am I reading that in Enoch and saying, well, I'm taking this as biblical scripture? That I don't do.
Yeah, no, I guess I get that. I just think that, I think one of the things that we talked about was where I get frustrated, and I'm going to generalize, right? People that don't want to go do the extra homework. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where I get frustrated, and I'm like you. I don't like outwardly say I'm frustrated with you because you don't, you know what I mean? But there is parts of me that say, if you just did a little research, you'd probably find out that your stance on that is not exactly correct. Mm-hmm. And so and these are the things that fascinate me, right? So there's these little nuances in the biblical story, like the Nephilim, mm-hmm. that I think play a huge part in explaining the fallen angels.
Yeah.
And so but we don't spend a lot of time on that. And I guess that's where I go. Like when I go to church, and maybe I'm not made for mainstream Christianity, because when I want to go to church and I want to learn these things, this is the stuff I want to learn.
Yeah.
I don't want to learn the good, the 10 verses that they always seem to use in all their sermons. I want to like, this is the stuff that fascinates me.
Yeah. Oh, I understand completely. What I will say is, so I brought up earlier the young earth, old earth, and there's also a third, which is mature creation. This is something that people debate all the time. And I'm with you. People debate it without actually doing research. They don't understand the concept of what they're saying. But once you get to the point where you do understand the concept, all three of them pose a challenge. So none of them are, hey, this one is the only one because it's the only one that makes sense. All three are kind of, I can debate all three sides well with research and understanding and not have a conclusive thought of that. So when it comes to like the Nephilim, there is compelling arguments that you can say, yes, this existed, and ones that say, no, it didn't. And I can use both sides of them, which makes it confusing for somebody who goes, well, what about this? Why can't it be old earth? And I go, because of this. Or why can't it be mature creation of earth? And you go, well, because of this. And I go, I understand that. I just don't know what it is. And that's the part where I go, God is probably laughing. I know he's laughing at me. I know when I meet him, I go, hey, I was talking about this. Was I right? He's going to be like, no, you were way off, but I appreciate the effort. I mean, chances are I'm going to be off about a lot of this stuff, and I'm okay with that. You have to have a sense of humor about yourself. Take God seriously. Don't take yourself so seriously. And I think that's the biggest problem is people debate these things. They take themselves so seriously. And to be honest, God's probably laughing, going, man, I don't know where you got that from. So that's my take on it.
It's funny because that's one of the things I always get tickled about. Like, why are we even debating how old the earth is? What does it really matter?
Mm-hmm. And to some people, they will scream at the top of their lungs, like, no, it matters for original sin. It matters for God's word. It matters for, they will. And again, they're not wrong. They're just so focused on it. They're losing focus on everything else that we're taught. Everything else that God has shown a million times in the Bible, which is, the best characters in there can be wrong and still be after God's own heart. We have to be willing to be wrong. And I think God will be fine. He'll be fine with it.
I used to, when my son was young teenager, and we would have these discussions, and him and his friends would sit around and they would start debating this, and I'm like you, I'd play both sides, and get them going. And at the end, I would say, does it really matter though? I mean, what's really important about the story? Like, whether you believe all of Genesis actually happened the way it said, or whether it was a synagogue story, does it really matter? Because at the end of the day, what's really important? God created it. That's what's important, right? Whether it's 6,000 years old or 15 billion years old, does it really matter?
It doesn't.
It really matters.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't matter in terms of salvation. I think what people do is, and here's, we talk about denomination. We talk about Bible verse translations and how many there are. There are so many denominations. And here's my thought, because a lot of people, you have these denominations that fight each other all the time. And my thought is, these are denominations who just love God. They love God. They're trying to figure out these things for themselves. They're trying to figure out these stories. One might take it more literally. One more take it more symbolically. But they're trying to do the best they can in loving God. And what ends up happening is they have such divisiveness and hatred for each other, for somebody else who's just trying to explain away God the way they can. Meanwhile, we are trying to explain God. I mean, right off that, we should laugh just at that, going, us humans are trying to explain God. There's no way we're going to. I love the topics. I can get involved. Listen, if you want to talk about it, we can go for days because I enjoy it. But I also know that there's no way I'm going to be right about everything. There's no way I'm going to be right about 10% of it. There's going to be some error in my translation and my feelings, because I'm also telling you the story of God through my own eyes. And you heard my eyes were Jewish, who has self-esteem issues, had to cover up tattoos, had to do all these things in my life. I'm going, how can I even trust myself? There's no way I'm going to trust myself with what I went through. I try to do the best I can, and I think other people do as well. So some just do it with a little bit more zeal and anger than others.
It's true. True, exactly, yeah. I had a thought and I was like, oh, it just went out of my head because that's what happens when I'm old. But
I was gonna ask though, because you kept saying that like you use tattoos to cover yourself up,
Yep.
but now that I mean, do you still feel that way, or are you able to like appreciate the tattoo art at least? And
I
whatnot?
definitely appreciate them. I look at my whole life completely different. So when I first became a Christian, I actually really disliked the Jewish side of me. I tried to cover it up and hide it until I realized how beautiful that side was, because I had an understanding of some of the language, some of the translations that other people didn't. I had an understanding of some of the tradition that other people didn't. So I began to love that side of it. And I began to love the side of me, and a lot of the people that I forgave throughout my life for different moments. The biggest one was me being able to forgive myself, and to look at those things now and go, wow, I'm so glad that I went through it. And that is something that is very tough, I think, for people when they're going through things, when they're in the fire. It's very hard to be grateful for going through it. But now that I'm here, I can look back and say, I am really grateful that he put me through those things to be able to help others better, to be able to feel this way when I'm studying his word better. So I'm appreciative now. I love my tattoos. I'm not one of those people that go, oh, because I have a tattoo, I'm sinning and I shouldn't be allowed into heaven and all. I love who God made me, and this is how he created me. And I absolutely am blessed that he created me in the way he did.
I think they're like crack though. Like you get one. I have one, right there. It's
addicting.
12 years in the military. Well, 12. I was gonna say 12 years in the military. Like I never had a tattoo, and then my son got sick his senior year of high school and was going through cancer. And then when he, while he was going through it, he's like, Dad, when I beat this, we need to get matching tattoos. And I was like, dude, you found the one thing that, like, the one reason why I would put something on my body, right? Like, I mean, I didn't dislike tattoos. I just never thought I would be one, right?
Yep.
And I was like, you found the one reason why I would put one on my body. But now I have it. It's been 3 years, and I'm like, I could go for a couple more.
Yes. It is also a very biblical story of how we forget. We were talking about, Exodus and Israelites and Levitical law. When they're out of Egypt and they're in the desert and they're going, man, I miss what the fish tastes like in Egypt. It is the forgetting what the past, you start to romanticize what the past was. And tattooing for me was, I get a tattoo, I'm going, man, this hurts. Why am I doing this? I have no interest in doing this. And then, a month later, I'm going, oh, I want to get another one. I miss going. And then you go again. And I'm sitting there, I'm going, why would I go again? I knew this hurt. I don't want to do this anymore. And I've done that 40 times. So.
That's too funny. I still haven't decided what my second one's going to be, but
You just have to be like me and get so many that it doesn't even matter anymore.
Yeah.
Well, that's true. I don't know, but it's funny because the one I got, like it, me being the first time, and how they draw it out on your arm before they start inking it, and I wasn't really paying attention and didn't think about it when they did it, and I was like, oh yeah, that looks fine. And then they started putting the ink to it, and I was like, oh crap, that like takes up my whole freaking forearm. And I get home, my wife goes, it's a little big, isn't it? I was like, well, yeah, I mean, can't take it back now. So
it's the perfect size. It's meant to be there.
Exactly. Exactly. So
yes.
Oh well.
No, I am honestly, it's funny. I'm at the point now where I can compare things, even like getting tattoos, to the Bible. Everything that goes through my head is, God put me through some tests, and there's things in my story that we haven't even hit here. I mean, everybody has stories, and they can have moments in their life where they were really in dark times. And I think that when you think about it and you think about why God would allow these things to happen, it's very easy to blame him. And then when good things are happening, it's very easy to thank ourselves and go, man, I made that happen. I worked that hard and I did this. And I think that a shift should happen when you start to really follow God, which is, I'm going to be okay. Even when I'm not okay, I'm okay, because the creator of everything created me, and he created this entire world with words. And it's beautiful. It's a beautiful world, but he did it very quickly with words. When he created us, he knit us. That takes time and intention. So if he did time and intention with me, he's not going to let me just slip away and be miserable all the time. He will work things out for our good. And sometimes it just takes a lot longer than we expect and we hope. But, we're going to go through some tough things. It's not going to be all easy. It's going to be, and it's going to be confusing. We're going to go, what about this book? And what about that? And what about that translation? And I do think that it's part of us being humans and understanding that when we're trying to understand something as complex as God, we're going to get it wrong and have some questions about it. And hopefully apologetics will help me answer some of those for people who are confused and hurting.
Yeah, I get that. All right. Well, we are at an hour. And David, we really thank you coming on. This has been fascinating and would love to have you back, actually, if you're interested.
Absolutely. I enjoyed this a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we could definitely go into some deep stuff here. But so we want to give you an opportunity to plug your book and I know you have a podcast.
Absolutely. So my book is, honestly, to find everything, I'll plug just the website. It's great. It is drdavidshapiro.org, drdavidshapiro.org. That has the podcast, the book coming up. It has a blog. Everything that I do is kind of there. So that's the best place to go.
Okay, awesome.
There are some conversations I've had that don't get as deep and as fun as this one. I actually enjoy the deeper conversations. So I appreciated this more than you know. So I will definitely tag and be back whenever you want.
And the funny thing about this is it only scratched the surface. Like, I feel like he could have gotten way more deeper.
I was trying to keep it to an hour. I mean, one day when we could record for 5 or 6 hours, maybe David and I will get on here and
there we go. I love it.
Probably go at it. So just exploring things, right? So anyway, well, again, we appreciate you being here today, and this has been awesome for us as well. So I know I don't want to speak for Grace and Michelle, but I have thoroughly enjoyed this, and thank you profusely for reaching out to us and coming on. So
thank you.
And with that,
all right. So if you enjoyed this episode, you can listen and watch our other episodes on YouTube and Spotify. You can join us in the conversation on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all of those. And then we've also, if you want to hear our reactions of our episodes, you can find us on Substack. And yeah, that's it.
We'll see you all later.
Next week.